Good morning. It's always worthwhile to remind oneself that Jesus was a Jew and that he was raised in the teachings and the practices of the Hebrew faith. The actions of Mary and Joseph demonstrate their commitment. You can see the teaching of obedience to God's laws, coupled with love and compassion in Joseph's response to Mary's virginal pregnancy. The annual trips to Jerusalem to worship and the familiarity of Jesus with the temple and the custom of debating the meaning of passages of the Torah reflect the orthodoxy of their home. Those lessons and examples of living that Jesus absorbed in his youth guided his life, his teachings, and his relations with others. God gave Moses the Ten Commandments, and Jesus gave us the one great all-encompassing commandment, that one love God completely and love one's neighbor as oneself. Now, Jewish rabbinical law recognizes some 613 God-given commandments. An observed commandment from God in Hebrew is known as a mitzvah. It's something that's performed as a religious duty. The more common use of mitzvah is acknowledging a deed performed to fulfill such a commandment. It's commonly used to recognize an individual act of human kindness that results from keeping the law, even if the person doing the deed is not a Jew. It's more than merely performing a good deed. It's doing it in a heartfelt manner that takes it beyond the legalistic fulfillment of the law. It's doing what is right because one is righteous. The third book of the Torah and the Bible, Leviticus, first records the words that Jesus would use in his commandment. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, which lies as the basis of so many mitzvahs, the reason why one does acts of human kindness. I must admit that I started this week griping about how manners have disappeared so drastically over the last few years, greatly accelerated by COVID. And then I realized I sounded as stressed and grouchy as the people I was complaining about. Definitely no deed to be admired in such thoughts. What I also realized is that as Christians, we need to consider incorporating mitzvahs into our day-to-day life. After all, if it was good enough for Jesus, surely it's good enough for you and for me. Starting with considering how our relations with one another have been affected and changed with isolation and fear and lost jobs and a faltering economy and rising inflation. Just look about you and you will see how some of these changes have manifested themselves. People are not talking to each other the way they used to do. That's to be seen in restaurants. Instead of the usual chatting as the courses are delivered and the meal savored or the day's events are shared, one party is taking pictures of the dinner to post online, and the other is playing a game on their phone. In cars, you no longer see parents and children playing games about license plates or hollering, "Potato!" at the sight of an oncoming car with only one headlight, or counting cows or reciting poetry. My father tried to teach me all of Robert Service's poems on our drives to my grand's home. Almost 70 years later, I can still get through most of the cremation of Sam McGee, who was born in Tennessee. I do wonder what the children of today will remember of trips spent sitting in the back seat, absorbed in the movie showing on their tablets. When I complain about pedestrians walking off the sidewalk into the street without so much as checking for an approaching car, what I really should be worried about is how their own safety comes second to the voice or the song on their earbuds that blocks out the warning horn. One of the things that mitzvahs are associated with is reciting a mini prayer first. For example, "Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has commanded us, ... and then you enumerate what you are about to do. And you can find a direction to do virtually anything that is kind and good in the Bible. So feel free to preface those things you do for others with prayer. I'm blessed to hear of so many good deeds done by my congregation and those I know. For instance, one of my parishioners recently noticed that a cat had been left behind when her owners moved out of their apartment. Unable to introduce another cat in her household, She spoke to the landlord, who's now leaving a window open so that the cat can get shelter when it rains. And our music director is feeding the cat. A mitzvah to a cat? Not what we think of as a kindness to a person, although I would argue this is also an unknown kindness to the owner who abandoned the cat. And then there's another who regularly provides food for a person who lives alone, is unwell, and who doesn't do a good job of caring for herself. And another who volunteers time to help students who have trouble with their schoolwork, but whose parents cannot afford a tutor. And who among us does not pray for others when there's nothing else that we can do for them? More than half of Canadians feel that their mental health has declined over the past 2 years. And I would wager that rather than 50% of Canadians, the number comes closer to 100% if one considers short-term effects of mental distress. Surely most of us have had more worries over the past 2 years, worrying about others, ourselves, the businesses for whom we work, or the businesses that we patronize. Adjusting to being alone or at home so much has meant major adaptations. Offending others by wearing or not wearing masks, getting on buses and feeling suspicious eyes watching us, or people moving away, or coming too close to us. It's all unsettling. We've lived through a time unlike any other in the world's history, and we are now trying to live in a new world, unlike in many ways the world we left when we went into isolation. What has been most affected seems to be our ability to interact with others. We're so used to communicating by technology that we've lost the enjoyment of face-to-face chatting. So surely a great mitzvah is to be found in our working to help integrate our neighbors and friends and family into mentally healthy companionship. Inviting someone out for a beer or a coffee may appeal to some, but others may be tempted to join you for a walk in the park with your dog. Or how about this one, offering a ride to church on Sunday? I admit to feeling flattered when someone tells me that my thoughts are all the sermon they need for the week. But when that is coupled with the statement that they are not ready to go back to church yet, I worry. I am sure for some it's the luxury of a lazy morning in bed that remains tempting. But for far too many, it is a fear of being indoors with others. And it is not necessarily St. Monica's that they are not returning to. Yes, I know some who haven't come back because of fear. It is churches of varied denominations and in cities near and far that are missing members of their church family. And while worship takes many forms in many places, alone and with others, there is something very special about worship in God's house. We come together in formal worship for a scant hour out of the 168 hours in a week, and yet it can set the tone for the whole week. It's a time of worship and fellowship, of learning and praying. And, as Jesus said, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them." What better reason to get together than to know that Jesus is there, cheering you on? Being a part of a church community also means that you know there are others who are praying for you, caring about how you are doing and wishing you well. The chats before the service, updates the doings of the week, and coffee afterwards, which we are just about to re-embark upon after the shutdown of COVID, is a convivial time to plan what lies ahead in one's own date book and in the life of the church. Church is no longer the formal event of our childhood. No hats and white gloves, suits and ties. Instead, we share time with others with whom we share our faith, and no questions can be raised, points debated, and religious tenets clarified. It seems to me that that should rank as a mitzvah from God. This is a time for mitzvahs, to reach out in every way imaginable to reintegrate oneself and one's neighbors back into the life of our community, our shops and schools, our churches and workspaces. Humans were not designed to be alone. Our courts have decided that solitary confinement, an extreme form of isolation, is contrary to our Constitution and not to be tolerated for any extended period of time. But for many, for over 2 years, that has essentially been their lives. And now it's up to us to break down barriers so all may return to the good mental health that is buoyed by camaraderie, companionship, and fellowship of everyday life. We thrive best when we live in harmony with our family and our neighbors. And harmony involves getting together and supporting each other and delighting in seeing smiles and laughter and sharing tears and sorrows and in the sounds of a baby's chatter, the sharing of a psalm, and knowing the sincerity of a heartfelt greeting as one is enfolded in the arms of another. We are out of practice in sharing our days and our lives. So let us work at regaining those skills, for therein lies much joy and health for everyone. Such a mitzvah is to be treasured. Well, as we contemplate the mitzvahs that we can do, we must never forget the evil that still stalks our world. The innocents of Texas, whose lives were shattered by a mad villain, and the cowards who enabled him, must be a reminder that much must be done. And that needs the efforts and commitment of each of us to care and protect our neighbors. May your days be blessed with the company of others, and may their lives be enriched by your presence. So may it be. Amen. Jesus asked Cain where his brother Abel was, and Cain replied, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Today it's up to each of us to ask where our neighbor, our friend, a relative is to be found, and go and find them and see what we can do to ensure they have re-entered everyday life, now that the constraints are repealed. Do it for them, and know that you do it for yourself as well.